when you work on what you have control over, you might not have control over how often there is physical sex, but you have control over how often you reflectively listen, actively listen to your partner, how often you validate them, how you show up for their hardships, how often you work on attunement. Sex will come eventually, no pun intended, but it will happen eventually.
Welcome to the Well-Nourished Mother podcast. This is a show for women who desire a deeper, more mindful and meaningful pregnancy, birth, and motherhood experience. In this space, we bring so much reverence to the rite of passage that is the maiden to mother journey. I'm your host, Lauren Fortuna Flock, founder of Nest and Nourished. I'm an ex-nurse turned birth worker, holistic nutritionist, and somatic coaching student with a fiery passion for birth prep and motherhood prep that blends the head and the heart. Join me for inspiring conversations with experts, mothers, and all-around badass wise women, exploring all the ways we can nourish ourselves, body, mind, and heart, in pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. This space will help you cultivate the knowledge, practices, and resources you need to be the most embodied, vibrant, authentic, intuitive, and well-nourished mother you deserve to be. So welcome. Let's do this. Welcome back to episode 4 of the Well-Nourished Mother podcast. We can't really talk about being well-nourished mothers without addressing connection, intimacy, and sexual expression. So this umbrella term, postpartum intimacy, it really is such a big topic. And I think it's also a bit of a taboo topic in certain circles. Definitely not mine. I love digging deep into these topics. But what I mean is I think a lot of women end up feeling really alone in their own experience, like with a lot of things about motherhood in general. And I think some women have a really hard time expressing anything to do with intimacy, sex drive, their desires, their needs with their partners, or even with close friends or other mothers too. So this is why I thought this would be a very important episode topic. I've also been having really interesting conversations about this topic with girlfriends of mine, other mothers, in various stages of postpartum. And there are a lot of common themes, it seems. You know, from just my limited interactions, I've heard things like feeling like there's something wrong with them or their relationship, or just not knowing how to navigate conversations about this, or thinking that you're so alone in this and that your relationship must be broken and everyone else must be just having a much easier time than you and your partner. But yeah, it seems the overall major theme is desiring validation and normalization. I think, like I said, a lot more couples have trouble with postpartum intimacy than they let on. So this episode will definitely help validate, normalize, and give you practical tools. Plus so much more. It really is a juicy conversation. So let me tell you about my guest. I'm chatting with Ashley Mariani. She's a clinical social worker specializing in couples' perinatal, mental, emotional, and sexual health, while also fiercely advocating against obstetric violence. Ashley has seen the implications of birth trauma's impact on the mental, emotional, and sexual lives of couples, and strives to help couples and individuals in prevention and resilience building. Ashley's academic background includes degrees in sexuality, counseling, and individual and couples work. The lens she works most passionately from is rooted in the body's innate wisdom, the nervous system. Ashley is a mother to 3 free-spirited children, including twins. She is a survivor of obstetric violence herself, and works with her clients from a holistic framework that utilizes movement, nutrition, plant medicine, vagus nerve toning, and functional medicine. Ashley really shares her wisdom and insights around this topic in such a non-judgmental and compassionate way. She really just has this way of making you feel super comfortable and has this lovely, laid back and calm nature about her. But yes, you'll see for yourself. So let's get into it. So welcome, Ashley. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me again. Today, we're talking all things postpartum intimacy, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on that because I know it's something that you're passionate about and super knowledgeable of. But first, I just want to put you on the spot teeny tiny bit.
Yeah.
My favorite question for all my guests so far. can you share one word or phrase to describe your current phase or season of motherhood?
Oh, that's a good one. This season of motherhood is so I dove into I'm going to expand. It's not going to be a one phrase thing. It's going to be a concept. I dove into this season of motherhood thinking that I really needed to focus on conscious parenting, thinking like this is the best practice. Conscious parenting is what, they say that the kids need. And I was hitting so many roadblocks. Like I felt like I just could not show up as a respectful, conscious, patient, soft at times. I couldn't show up in that capacity. I felt very rigid. I felt very like a lot of pressure, lots of anger, lots of rage. And then I had a monumental moment in dealing with my own childhood stuff where I realized that I hadn't dealt with my inner child wounding. And the minute I started to deal with my inner child wounds, I started to see less resistance, especially from my 6-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
But that inner child healing kind of, and I guess that's the word that I would say would be healing, opened up more of these like portals and pathways to creativity and individuality, and femininity. So it was kind of tenfold in the ability to just offer more to my life. And the ripple effect was that I was able to do the conscious parenting that I was hoping to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be a whole podcast episode in itself right there. But thank you. Yes, I resonate a lot with what you said, just about the anger and feeling like you even like we're always trying to kind of put ourselves in boxes, really, like even the conscious parenthood box, right? And if you don't seem to fit right away, it's like, well, then something's wrong with me or I'm doing it wrong.
Yes.
So it's fascinating that, you were able to kind of look inward and see what the root to that was.
Yeah.
And I've been doing some similar diving into the inner child. And something that I've really noticed is that I think I was stifled a lot as a child. Like I wasn't really allowed to cry. I wasn't allowed to have big emotions. So now when I hear my toddler really crying, it triggers me. Oh, it's such a trigger. And I get so angry and I respond in ways that I do not ever want to respond in. And then I feel guilty. Like it's such a cycle, but I'm aware of it now. Like having that aha moment was like, it was huge. Yeah. I just love asking this question because it really kind of it illuminates what other women are experiencing and going through.
Yes.
So I just find it fascinating. So
yeah.
thank you. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, the work that you do, and what lights you up?
Yes. So my name is Ashley Mariani. I am I'm a lot of things. I'm a mother to 3. I'm a wife. I'm an entrepreneur. I grew up in a rural community. So I guess you could say like I'm a country girl at heart. I still live in a rural community. That has not changed. I have expanded my practice. So I started out as a perinatal mental health therapist, and I've expanded to become a perinatal couples therapist. And that's just integrating my academia, my academic education from my undergrad into my graduate school education, and kind of just finding what makes sense for this chapter of my life and what makes sense for the type of people who are looking for a therapist, my age, my life experience, that kind of thing. So I love working with couples. For me, when I was doing a lot of perinatal mental health, I felt like women were showing up to therapy carrying so much emotional and mental weight and the burden of fixing themselves that I said to myself, and I would encourage them, you don't have to carry this alone. Your partner should be here. This shouldn't be something that you're trying to tackle amongst a million other things to try to better yourself. So this is when I kind of started moving towards like the couple work, because the family is a system. And while it doesn't make sense for the kids to be a part of this healing directly, the couple needs to be able to rely on each other and support one another in their ebbs and flows of healing and being. And so perinatal couples therapy, specializing in birth trauma and postpartum intimacy, seemed to be what lights the fire in my belly the most.
I love that you said that. Yeah, like it's a family system. So why would just the woman or just the other partner, be trying to shoulder all of that themselves? You know, that there's already so much on our plates that we're trying to keep track of and do and heal. So yeah, I love that. I knew that you would be such a great person to talk to about this. You gave a workshop presentation in the business mentorship program that I'm in all about this topic, and I just loved what you shared. So first things first, I think sometimes when people see the term postpartum intimacy, the first thing that comes to mind is sex, and that it's just all about sex, right? And I know that sexual expression is a component of intimacy, but it's kind of missing the bigger picture of what it really includes, right? So can you start us off by just defining intimacy? What does intimacy really mean?
Yeah. I think what most people think of when they hear intimacy is like what you said, sexual closeness, sexual interactions. And I think this is part and partial to the medical model and what the medical model has, the discourse around postpartum sex and postpartum intimacy, and being very specific about you're at your 6-week checkup and now you can have sex is kind of like the go-to. Like your pelvis, your womb is healed enough now that you can have a foreign object enter it, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre to me. And so, well, this idea of sexual closeness and sexual interactions fits under the umbrella of intimacy. It's not the only way to be intimate, especially with your partner. And so, what is intimacy? What elements, maybe a better question is like, what elements create an intimate moment? And the concept of intimacy involves mutually consensual relationship where two individuals reciprocate intimate moments of feeling trust, emotional and physical closeness towards each other, oxytocin releases and bonds, hormone type capacities happening. So, in talking to hundreds of couples over the last few years, I've been able to break down some common themes and their working definitions of what they mean when they say intimacy. And I think it's important to kind of like crowdsource a definition, not what does the what does the dictionary call postpartum intimacy? It's like, what does the average person call postpartum intimacy? And so when I hear we need more intimacy from couples, what I was hearing was intellectual understanding, emotional closeness, spiritual bonds, sexual expression, inter and intra personal skills, meaning self-awareness and attunement. And finally, like the need for vulnerability.
And it's almost like sexual expression for some can be the result or the outcome of having all of those other pieces of intimacy in place, like the trust and the openness and the vulnerability. It's not like the sex comes first. Maybe in some couples, sure. But I think especially for women, I'll generalize. I think it's usually the outcome of having all of those other things kind of in place and flowing.
Definitely. Yes.
Yeah. So how is intimacy affected by birth? I mean, we're welcoming another little being into the home. I mean, I'll share my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep deprivation, being in a bit of survival mode in terms of my nervous system regulation. I think all of this played a role in changing the kind of intimacy available
Mm-hmm.
in our partnership. But then on the other hand, there were different types of intimacy that, were created. For example, like the way my husband cared for me immediately after birth. He like helped me change pads and spoon fed me breakfast while I breastfed my child. And those were like really intimate, trusting moments that didn't exist prior to that. We were like going to the bathroom with doors closed, and that's just totally done now. Sorry, Cohen. um, so what I mean is, yeah, it shifts and changes. And in your experience, how does having a baby kind of shift the expression of intimacy?
Well, I think it's different for a lot of couples, but I can say the consensus is that most couples think that there's something wrong with them or wrong with their relationship because intimacy doesn't happen in the same ways that it used to. So, this idea of where once, even conversations around romance, where once romance looked like lavish dinner dates and the movies and weekends away, now romance really feels like grabbing a jar of local raw honey off the side of the road and bringing it home with like a fresh batch of peach jam or something like that. Just knowing that the two of you are going to get at least 10 minutes to sit down and enjoy some kind of sweet meal together. That's okay. And if that even doesn't happen, if romance looks far different than even that thoughtful moment, then you kind of just have to acknowledge that there's a shift that's taken place and acknowledge that expectations need to be reestablished, right? Because one of the things that I will criticize the majority of couples on, myself included, is that we get so caught up in the lust and the excitement of a new relationship that we don't communicate expectations until we're knee deep in it, and then we're going, okay, well, you're not meeting my expectations. Oh, but like, what are your expectations? Well, that's not my expectation. That's not my expectation, right? So postpartum and having a baby is another amazing opportunity for a couple to say like, okay, let's scratch everything clean slate. What are your expectations now? If I can't meet those expectations, how are we going to accommodate them being met? I'm not saying that you don't deserve them not being met. I'm just saying that I might not be the person to meet them. So if you have the expectation of being up all night, me being up all night with you while you're feeding the baby, when I have a job that requires me to be, on X, Y, and Z because people's lives are at stake. Does this mean if I'm not willing to meet that expectation of being up all night, does it mean that we, hire a postpartum doula? Do we have a family member come in to do night shifts if that's what makes sense? So being able to go back to the drawing board and reestablish expectations, especially around intimacy, not especially, but including intimacy, makes tons of sense. Does it make sense that the expectation is to have sex 3 times a week? Does it make sense to have the expectation that we are going to fall asleep telling each other our wildest dreams and hopes for the future? Maybe, but maybe not. So the chapter you're in some kind can feel like it consumes you, and it can feel like this is never going to end or this is never going to get better. And when you work on what you have control over, you might not have control over how often there is physical sex, but you have control over how often you reflectively listen, actively listen to your partner, how often you validate them, how you show up for their hardships, how often you work on attunement. So how attuned you are to that partner. And sex will come eventually, no pun intended, but it will happen eventually.
Love a good cum pun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really about communication, right? And if you're going into having a baby and your relationship has been lacking a little bit of that communication and setting up expectations and speaking openly, then all of a sudden, once a baby's in the picture, it's like, well, we didn't know how to do it before, and now we really don't know how to do it. It kind of feels like, yeah, like something's wrong, like you said. And then there's the level of this weird cultural pressure around sex, you know, in the stupid magazines. Does anyone still read those? You know, that the frequency and amount, and it has to be so like spontaneous. And yeah, there's just so many things that change. So even for example, my love language, I used to be a physical touch person, whatever. Physical touch was my thing. That is what made me feel loved and appreciated. And now I am very likely touched out almost every single day. And I know that's a symptom of a dysregulated nervous system. But the idea of like being touched once I've finally, you know, put the toddler to bed and I can have a moment to just like be in my own physical space, it's like the last thing I want. So everything's shifting, even the way that you want to experience love or your love language. It can be hard to navigate. It can be hard to figure out what you like and don't like and want and need and all of that. And communication, like you said, is really the key component here, right?
Yeah. And I find the love languages thing interesting because if the mental load of motherhood didn't fall so heavily on the shoulders of mothers, would acts of service be their primary love language? Because for 90% of mothers, acts of service is a primary love language.
Right.
And then, so is it that you would feel like what would happen if there was more equity in the relationship? Would you still have acts of service as your primary love language? Is that actually how you feel most loved? Or is it just so deep? Is it such a deep need that you have to have met because there's so much lack in it that you think that it's your primary love language? And when it comes to physical touch, I always say, and I have to explain this to partners often, that if your partner is, especially if they're like breastfeeding or doing lots of skin to skin, lots of bonding with a new baby, it's not that they don't necessarily want you to touch them. It's just that their need for physical touch has been surpassed. So they still have a need for physical touch. It's just that this tiny being that actually needs their body to survive is utilizing all of those, you know, little tickets that say, okay, you know, we've surpassed the amount, and now anything outside of this amount just feels overstimulating and dysregulated. If this little being wasn't around using up all those tickets, then you would definitely be the one that was meeting all those physical touch needs. So it's not that her need for physical touch is gone forever. It's just that it's overflowing with the baby and touching her on the regular basis, that there's no need for you to touch her now, even though that might be your need.
Right. Yeah. Can we talk about like some simple ways to maintain intimacy or nurture the intimate connection in your partnership while also deep in those early postpartum time? Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind when you're asking this, ways to kind of deepen the intimacy, is relationship rituals. And a relationship ritual is a signature moment between a couple that develops as time passes and as attunement becomes stronger. So the key to developing relationship rituals is to understand what each other's nervous systems need. Is that an energized space or a quiet, low energy space? Is it touch, like you're saying, or is it something else? And developing a few rituals for emotional connection, as well as rituals for conflict repair, can help nurture the emotional health of a couple. And when we nurture the emotional health, we nurture the intimacy. So we want to think about rituals for greetings and partings, rituals for celebrations and losses, mornings and evenings, are rituals for weekly responsibilities, and then also holiday traditions. And then, most importantly, rituals for conflict and connection. Mm. So, getting really creative about ways to connect is kind of like the world is your oyster. There's so many different ways that couples can bring intimacy into their life. And it's hard to even with my clients, it's hard to prescribe. I can kind of get the juices flowing for ideas. But ultimately they need to come up with ideas together that make sense for the resources that they have in their chapter of life.
Mm-hmm. So for example, like a greeting ritual might be like the way that you guys literally greet each other when, say, your partner comes home. So is it like a long hug and a kiss? Is it a slap on the bum? Is it a hi from the corner? Whatever, whatever that looks like.
Yes, exactly. And like, I think that there's a lot of resistance in greeting rituals, because for a lot of people, it takes them back to a scene from the 50s, right? Where the wife is looking perfect and greets her husband at the door and takes his briefcase and his hat and his suit jacket and brings him, his whiskey on the rocks while he sits in his lazy boy and, does whatever. And well, that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about thinking about whoever is home second is greeted at the door by, if that's possible, by the person who is already home. Mm-hmm. And making that, I mean, even in my home, I work from home. So it just so happens that my husband, when he's home at 5:30 at night, I noticed the difference in his demeanor and his energy and his self-confidence as a father. If I sat there and just kind of like, hey, what's up? How was your day? From across the room versus, hey, babe, I would get up right now. I'm sitting with the kids reading this book, but if you want to come over, I'll give you a kiss and give you a hug and let you know that I missed you today. And if I have the ability to go to him to say, I hope you had a great day. Here's a long kiss. Here's a long hug. That makes a world of difference. Mm-hmm. It truly does. Like, your partner has just been away from the family, been away from the home, and now they're coming back to the family. And so, like I said, it doesn't have to be gender specific, obviously. Mm-hmm. But just welcoming that partner back into the home after a long day to say, we missed you. We're glad to have you home. We want you part of this, daily activity, and come join us.
Mm-hmm. And like you said before, like, these are the things that we do have control over. Like, yes, we don't have control over, time. And it feels like sometimes that there's just no time to have actual sex, or there's no space in the house when your child's sleeping in your bed, or you have in-laws living in your basement, or, so these are the things that you do have control over. And my question is, how do we make this not feel like something else on the list, or is that a symptom of something bigger going on, that you're just kind of tapped out all around in general?
Well, I always say that your postpartum period is not a time to be working on your relationship. As the individual who's given birth, who's carried a child, you are not responsible for the emotional labor that goes into making your relationship healthier right now. If your partner wants to work on that because they understand the benefits and how it will eventually come around to the both of you working on the relationship together, chances are you've probably done more research on, what the relationship needs anyways. So maybe they will just be catching up with the information that you already know. But the postpartum period should not be for any hard work outside of learning your baby, learning how to mother maybe one or two or three children, learning your body, learning your interests again. This is super important. But when it comes time to say, I'm ready to do this again, and you're feeling this sense of one more thing on my list to do, that can be a sign that there's resentment, because in reality, this is your partner. You should want to work on your relationship. You should want the health of the relationship should represent this place of this is only going to make my life better anyways, right? This isn't a tit for tat. It's not a, I'm doing this for you so that you benefit. It's, I'm choosing to greet you at the door and give you a long embrace and a hug because it's making our life better. Mm-hmm. And if you're feeling that resentment, maybe it has to do more with the recognition or not having your needs met or not having a partner that's speaking your love language, right? If you're somebody whose love language is words of affirmation, and you go out of your way every morning. I'll say this, I will be transparent. My husband is very good. He wakes up at 4:30 in the morning. He does his workout. Before he leaves for work, he'll make us all breakfast so that when we come down at 7:00, it's all ready. Mm-hmm. So most of the time that's pancakes, sausage, bacon. It's all ready under like a little warmer. It's good to go. And he always fills up the kettle and sets my clean coffee cup beside the kettle with the nicely placed mushroom powders around it because he never knows which I'm going to choose. And for a really long time on our way to school, I would put the kids on speakerphone and they would say, "Thank you for breakfast, Dad." Every morning. That was part of our ritual. Mm-hmm. And one day he said to me, I really love hearing the kids appreciate the breakfast that I made for them. But, like, I don't want to sound rude, but you never mention the fact that I fill up the kettle and put the coffee cup out. And my initial knee-jerk reaction was, I have so much shit going on. Like, I'm sorry that I didn't remember to thank you for that one little thing. And I felt that well up inside me, that defensiveness. And then I stopped and I said, you're right. And it's not because I don't appreciate it. I do appreciate it. And I'm sorry that I never take the time to tell you that specific thing, because that is very particular. That's a very particular thing that he does for him and I. The rest is for the family. This is my way of contributing in the morning because I have to leave before you guys even get up. But this one little thing that I do is kind of like the, hey, babe, I'm thinking of you. I love you. I'm on my way out the door and I'm going to do this thing. And I never acknowledged it. So by me accepting the fact that I never acknowledged it and hearing him say that that would be something that he would like to hear more of, that was his identification of words of affirmation. He needs to hear that I appreciated that. And it takes 2 seconds out of my day in reality to do that. And what that does is that what was happening was he was coming home and there was this tension, and it wasn't tons of tension, but it was there and I could feel it and I could never figure out what it was. And I don't even think that he had the insight to identify that. And when I started acknowledging that he was doing this for me, that tension was gone when he came home. Mm-hmm. So when we invest in our relationship, we have to really see it as an investment. We have to see it as, if we have a joint bank account and I'm putting money into the joint bank account, this is our money. It's not going to just benefit me or just benefit you. This is our resources. And so when we're constantly working on our relationship and doing better by our partners, no matter what that looks like, it's for the longevity of our relationship, even if we're not getting the results in the moment that we're expecting.
I love that. I love just the idea of investing in the relationship. Like that's so true. That really helps kind of reframe it and make it more about you as a family unit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than just trying to get something from the relationship.
Yes.
Yeah. Can we talk about so say there's been a really long period of having no sex or
Mm-hmm.
very little actual physical sex.
Mm-hmm.
It can almost feel awkward to try to initiate that again. Like it
Mm-hmm.
can feel like you're a teenager / young adult experiencing it for the first time again. What are some ways, and I think we've kind of already laid the foundation for this, but what are the ways to kind of even just maybe what I actually want to talk about is how do you see yourself as a sexual being after being such a, I guess, as the woman, as the birther, after being just a constant vessel of nurturing,
Yes.
physically, if you're, say, extended breastfeeding, co-sleeping, all of that good stuff. How do you kind of start to see yourself as a sexual being again when all of that has kind of been on the back burner and your body has literally been a vessel for nourishment for this little being for so long? Yeah, we'll start there.
I think that that's a criticism of our culture and of society, right? So because there's this pendulum that has swung one way that has completely sexualized pregnant women to the point of fetishism. And then the pendulum swings the other way where it's like, oh, yuck, you're a mom. Like, don't talk about sex. You can't be sexy. Now you have to wear mom jeans that make you look frumpy and I mean, they are comfy, but they're comfortable, they're practical, but they don't feel sexy. And even I'm sitting here wearing a nursing bra and I don't even nurse anymore. And it's like, those are the little things. I could go out and buy a cute little lacy bralette that was just for me that I put on. But instead I choose to wear my nursing bra because it's practical and it's comfortable. But I really think that this is a systemic issue, and even how we talk about women while they're pregnant and how they're so delicate and how we have to be so careful. And the thought of sex with a pregnant woman may be something that even like a partner has to wrap their head around because they've learned for so long that you can't be both. You can't be pregnant or you can't be a mother and you can't be a sexual being at the same time. Like that doesn't make sense. So I think this duality is the systemic problem, but we need to get back to a place where if you're able to embody the things that give you confidence, if you're able to find access to your inner feminine energy, that divine feminine energy, when you're, being creative, when you're dancing, when you're moving, when you're out in nature, when you're when you're nurturing, when you're growing. So even like gardening is such a way to tap into that feminine energy. When you can find the momentum and gain the confidence, then you show up in the sexual spaces embodying that. Now that really also depends on your partner. Is your partner showing up with the opposite balanced energy, and I for people who aren't comfortable with the terms of masculine and feminine energy, I'm not talking about man, woman, male, female. I'm just talking about the yin and the yang, the sun and the moon. So if you're someone who embodies as a feminine person, if you embody more masculine energy, you have to kind of think about what is it going to take for you to tap into that more feminine energy? Is that going to take your partner maybe showing up in a different way? Is your partner riddled with anxiety? Is your partner hesitant, unable to make plans, kind of like indecisive? That's going to cause you to lean more towards your masculine energy, to take on that grounding, that leadership, that planning, that structure. So you're not going to be able to tap into the part of you that feels sexy. And the more they can show up in this mature masculine space, you can then fall towards that femininity and say, okay, like I'm going to be sexual in this way. And I trust you as my partner that you're going to hold space for this. And I'm not going to be too much for you. And as I explore my own sexuality, you're going to remain this safe container for me to try new things and explore new things. And there's not going to be criticism and there's not going to be judgment. And we're going to start really slow. So even gaining confidence in the sexual experiences will not start off with genital touch. It will start off with touch in general. How does it feel to massage my arm? How does it feel to massage my thigh? How does it feel for me? How does it feel for you? And that's kind of how we integrate. Even when we talk about trauma survivors, sexual trauma survivors, the sensate focus method has been a way for people to kind of explore the sensory experience of feeling the feeling, the touch, the textures, the smells, the sensations that come up for them, instead of focusing on performing for their partner. Mm-hmm. And when you can show up to any experience for yourself and feel like you deserve pleasure, you deserve to be the one experiencing the sensations instead of saying, I have to serve my partner in this way, it changes the dynamic completely. So long answer long, I guess. Being more in touch with this idea of yin and yang, sun and moon, feminine, masculine energy, that makes sense for you. Like there's no prescription that, you should do this, this, and this, and this to feel more feminine. It's what makes you feel more feminine. It's not going to be the same as what makes me feel more feminine. And embodying that energy and communicating that to your partner, and how can your partner show up to create that balance to allow you to be in that more divine feminine energy is going to be important to it.
I like that you answered that in the context of it being about both partners again, mm-hmm. because I think it's easy for it to be like, for you to think about it as, oh, it's something I need to do. Again, it's something I need to work on. It's something I need to get right in myself. I need to see myself as sexual again, without really thinking about the other person's role in all of mm-hmm. that. So I like mm-hmm. that you've centered the idea that it's a dyad, right? It's a couple, it's a whatever, however many, it's, a unit, not just yes. one person doing this and the other one kind of tagging along or doing yes. their own thing somewhere else, Yeah. Which makes sense in the context of couples therapy.
Yeah. And this is evident if we look at mothers who've had babies with different partners. Right. So how they feel sexy with their first partner might not be how they feel sexy with the second partner. If the first partner possessed more feminine energy than masculine energy, and that caused that mother to have to kind of lean into her masculine energy more, there wasn't enough space for her to feel feminine. But the second partner possesses tons more mature masculine energy, and she just has so much space to flow in that feminine energy, then it's more representative of the partnership and not of the individual person.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. What I really want to make sure we do today is kind of just normalize this idea that if you're not having sex, physical sex, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because again, I think, the cultural crap tries to tell you that if you're not having, 3 times a week for an hour at a time, up against a wall, then it's not like you don't have a passionate relationship and something's wrong. So can we talk a little bit about
again, especially with extended breastfeeding, like the hormones at play and what's kind of happening on more of a physiological level. And in terms of like, I'm sure you'll get there, pregnancy prevention.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad you asked that question. So first of all, Hollywood sets us up for failure when it comes to what sex looks like. We already know the adult entertainment industry sets us up for failure, but on a less obvious level, Hollywood sets us up for failure because we're seeing all these hot and steamy sex scenes and we think like, oh God, like we used to do that. Why can't we do that anymore? Right. But especially with extended breastfeeding too, as long as our bodies feel like our resources are being taken up already, it's not going to create an environment where we're going to feel arousal or desire on a regular basis because it's going, no, sorry, you are making milk for one particular baby right now. So we can't share the resources.
Yeah.
This does not make sense right now. And even if you aren't breastfeeding, it's still looking at the body from a deficiency standpoint, right? A lot of people go into pregnancy being deficient of nutrients to begin with. Then we create this human inside of us that utilizes so many of the nutrients that we do have stored. And then we have the postpartum experience where if we are breastfeeding or not, it's still providing nutrients from our body to some capacity. So now the body is going like, okay, like let's go back to the beginning. Let's start replenishing the nutrients. So if you have a body that's in a deficit of nutrients that gets pregnant, now we have a further deficit of nutrients. So it's not even at baseline. The body is going to be like, we need to fill this stockpile. We need to stockpile nutrients if we're going to have a baby again. So it's not thinking about the top of the hierarchy. I like to think of it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but with, pleasure and adventure being at the top of the hierarchy. Right now, we're just thinking about survival, like get the nutrient stores stocked up so that we can utilize all of our organs properly so that our metabolic health can kind of reach some kind of baseline. And then if we do that, we'll start getting the gears moving for arousal and desire and thinking about having another baby. Mm-hmm. And if we incorporate birth trauma or any kind of trauma, that's probably going to take a lot longer because now we're not just working biologically from a nutrient standpoint, but we're also working from a nervous system standpoint. Like, okay, that's fine and dandy that, our D levels have been stocked up or our vitamin B12 levels have been stocked up, but we still think there's a predator out there. So we're going to burn through those real fast anyways. Mm-hmm. And if we think there's a predator out there, we're not going to want to get pregnant, mm-hmm. which is going to manifest in sometimes infertility and sometimes just mm-hmm. little to no libido or desire anyways. Mm-hmm. So instead of partners taking it so personally, because I see this so often, like, what's wrong with me that you don't mm-hmm. want to have sex with me? I really, really, really want to drive home the message to them that 9 times out of 10, it's not them. It's not anything personal. Are there things that they can be doing to help support the nervous system of the mother? 100%. Ask them, what more do you need to feel safe? What do you need to feel emotionally safe, physically safe, financially safe, spiritually safe? Because when you feel safe, then everything finds homeostasis. And then we can get back to this place where we can have sex because sex is the cherry on top. Mm-hmm. And when we see women in particular pushing past any kind of alarm systems in their bodies, and they're just, seeking sex left, right, and center to meet deeper seated needs, that's a trauma response, right? Like my worth isn't rooted in anything else but being a good lay or giving a good hand job or providing my partner pleasure. And that's not actually what they want. That's just the narrative that they've created about themselves. So, I mean, I always think about, when I see, especially younger mothers have back-to-back pregnancies, and my head goes to these places of like, I just wonder, like, does she just feel so safe and so supported? And she did such a good job at, stocking up all the nutrients in her body that this is just like the natural rhythm of it all? Or did she feel pressured into having sex and then before she was ready, before her body was ready, and now she's pregnant again and she's not sure how she's going to support this brand new baby and also carry a baby? Mm-hmm. These are all like the places my head wanders to, and not in a judgmental way, in a more of like a curious way.
Yeah, like looking at the larger picture way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've touched on so many great topics, and I feel like we could have gone way deep on any of them.
It's like a smorgasbord.
Yeah. It's hard to like cram it all into a short chat. But I guess before we wrap things up, is there anything that's popping up for you that you want to touch on, or should we maybe talk a little bit about how body image or birth trauma plays into this?
Barriers to intimacy is where my head is going with this.
Yeah.
And birth trauma is one of them. So when a client comes to me and they claim that their relationship is suffering postpartum due to lack of sex and intimacy, there's like a checklist of things that I will go through and inquire about. So first, I clear the air about the arbitrary 6 weeks go ahead from the midwife or doctor. Like, that is nothing. It has nothing to do with sex. Do not worry about it. Listen to your own body. That's it. That's all. Mm-hmm. Then I ask about their birth experience. So birth trauma, if there has been birth trauma, it will be important for the couple to both individually and as a system break down and move through the healing process of the birth trauma. And birth trauma can encompass obstetric violence. So if you've had birth trauma in the form of having a baby in a NICU or having a really scary experience in your pregnancy that had nothing to do with the healthcare providers, that's one thing. But then if we have obstetric violence where the birth trauma was a result of any or all of the providers or the admin or anybody involved in the physical care, whether it's doula or birth keeper or birth attendant, they kind of encompass this idea of what would be the people involved in obstetric violence. So if obstetric violence took place, the woman's body will have to develop a level of trust from outsiders and from herself again, too. She's probably thinking about all the ways that she violated her own boundaries and how can I trust my intuition and why did my intuition lead me down this path? And as we know on a cellular level, trauma becomes imprinted into the body and there can be a stuckness, especially in the womb after birth trauma, and a dissociation between felt sense or memories of pleasure. So working with narratives and somatics and body work can often help move that stuckness. And after the birth trauma conversation, I go into the emotional safety of the relationship. And then next is identity, kind of like, has she taken the time to relearn who she is? Kind of this conversation that we've just had about sexuality, and stepping into motherhood. And then how does the body like to be touched and spoken to? Where does her passions pull her now? Has she learned to self-pleasure? And speaking of passions, what kind of creative or active outlets does she have to move stress through her body? So learning the stress response cycle and learning that stress means you're probably not going to feel desire or arousal. So how can we complete the stress response cycle to be able to get to that place? Then there's perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and medication, of course. So I think that there's just so many layers in the barriers to intimacy that when we think that it's just one thing, it's kind of that picture of the iceberg in the water. When we think that it's just one thing, oh, it's just that I don't like my body now. It's just like I have extra fat on my tummy and that doesn't make me feel sexy. It's so much deeper than that.
I think the big kind of overarching theme through everything we've talked about is communication. If we can't talk to our partner about these things, get on the same page. And this idea of normalizing things. If you're in a phase where there's just not much sex happening, can you speak to your partner about it? Can you agree that it's okay and that there's other forms of intimacy that you can focus on for now, and know that it's not a reflection of your love for each other or the health of your relationship? I think in speaking to some other mom friends, that's the worry that I have personally heard a lot. So So thank you, Ashley, for sharing all of that. You've given us some really great tips and things to think about. Where can we find you to stay connected?
Well, you're the first podcast episode that I've had since I changed things around. So you can find my therapeutic information, therapy related to specifically me, over at therogue.therapist. And my online clinic, which is myself and a chiropractic doctor who is focused on attachment, baby-led sleep, and soon to be lactation, Dr. Lauren. And her and I can be found over at mindonline.ca on Instagram, or mindonline.ca on our website.
A big, big thank you to Ashley for sharing her wisdom and insight around this huge topic. I really hope this episode left you feeling validated with a sense of normalization for how hard intimacy and sex can sometimes feel postpartum. Personally, I loved our discussion around tending to relationship rituals as a simple tool for deepening intimacy, and I'll definitely be chatting with my own partner about our own rituals, or sometimes lack thereof, and giving those aspects a little more love and attention. So come join the conversation over on Instagram at nestandnourish_. If this episode brought up any questions that you'd like answered, or if you had your own aha moment and feel like sharing, I would just love to hear from you. As always, please rate and review the show wherever you're listening from. It really helps it just blossom and grow, and I am ever grateful. So that's it for today. See you next time.